He died behind the wheel. Cab number 108. Pulled over. Engine still running. Gone. At his funeral, they played The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. His family thought he was just a taxi driver. But 24 years later, his daughter opened a box she'd never seen before. Inside was a photograph, signed by a man who called himself Fat Jack. The inscription read, "To Elmer Wyatt, friend, generally taxi driver, different occasions spy, the handiest, authorized, and bona fide spy in the entire Watergate mess." Everyone knows Watergate, the break-in, the tapes, Nixon resigning on live television. But nobody, and I mean nobody, knows about the taxi driver, the man who was never trained, never caught, never charged. The most effective spy in the entire operation was a 60-year-old cab driver with a Xerox machine and a smile. No one tells you this part. The Invisible Man, Washington D.C., early 1970s. If you drove a taxi in this city, you didn't just drive people, you drove secrets. Senators talked strategy in the back seat. Lobbyists cut deals between traffic lights. Staffers gossiped about classified briefings without checking if the partition was up. And for over 30 years, Elmer Wyatt sat behind the wheel, listening, watching, knowing exactly who mattered. He wasn't educated, he wasn't political, but he was something far more dangerous than either. He was invisible. Nobody looks at the driver. Nobody watches what the driver hears. And Elmer Wyatt heard everything. His daughter, Verona, said something about her father that tells you everything you need to know. She said, "He always had a secret aspect of things. He always had something going on. Some scheme. He just had his hands in a lot of pots." According to family stories, Wyatt used to run numbers in old D.C., an illegal street lottery. He knew the racetracks. He knew the gambling parlors. He knew every bookie, every hustler, every backroom deal in the district. A man like that doesn't need a badge. He doesn't need clearance. He already has the most valuable thing in espionage, access. But here's where the story turns. The phone call that changed everything. In 1971, Wyatt had a stroke. It knocked him off the road for 6 weeks. When he came back, his body was weaker. His bank account was thinner, and he needed money. So he picked up the phone and called the one friend who might have a job for him, a man named John Buckley. Now, Buckley wasn't some random contact. He was a former FBI agent. The two had met years earlier at a gambling operation where Buckley was making a bust. One was enforcing the law, the other was breaking it. And somehow, they became friends. That kind of friendship between a hustler and a Fed sounds like a movie. But what happened next wasn't fiction. It was worse. The machine behind the president. By the time Wyatt called Buckley in late 1971, Buckley had left the FBI. He was now working for the most paranoid political operation in American history, the Committee to Re-elect the President. You might know it by its nickname, CREEP. And yes, that was the actual acronym. You can't make this up. CREEP's job was simple. Make sure Richard Nixon won re-election by any means necessary. And their biggest fear wasn't the economy. It wasn't Vietnam. It was one man, Senator Edmund Muskie. Muskie was a Democrat from Maine, former vice presidential candidate. Clean image, strong polling. And in every projection, he was the only Democrat who could beat Nixon. Nixon didn't just want to win. He wanted to choose his opponent. The candidate Nixon wanted to face was George McGovern from South Dakota, a far-left anti-war senator who could easily be painted as radical. So the plan was clear. Destroy Muskie. Hand the nomination to McGovern. Then crush McGovern in the general election. But how do you destroy a man without leaving fingerprints? This is where it gets dark. The Dirty Tricks campaign. Nixon's people didn't just spy on the Democrats. They ran a full sabotage campaign. And the word they used for it? They actually called it rat-fucking. That's not me being dramatic. That's the actual term used by Donald Segretti, the man Nixon's team hired to orchestrate the chaos. Here's what CREEP's operatives did to destroy Muskie's campaign. They forged a letter, now known as the Canuck letter, and planted it in a New Hampshire newspaper. The letter made it look like Muskie had used a racial slur against French Canadians. It was completely fake. Written by a Nixon operative. Published by a newspaper publisher who didn't bother to check. The letter went off like a bomb. Muskie tried to fight back. He stood outside the newspaper's office in the middle of a snowstorm and gave a speech defending himself and his wife. But something happened during that speech that would end his campaign. Reporters said he cried. Muskie always denied it. He said it was snow melting on his face, but the damage was done. The headlines wrote themselves. A man who cries can't be president. That was 1972. And just like that, the frontrunner collapsed. But the Canuck letter was just one tool. The sabotage ran deeper, much deeper. And this is where Elmer Wyatt comes in. The recruitment. When Wyatt called Buckley looking for a side job, Buckley saw something no one else would have noticed. A taxi driver. Someone who blends in anywhere. Someone who knows how to talk to anyone. Someone who can walk into a room and not a single person asks why he's there. Buckley had a codename within Creep. He used the alias Jack Kent for official business. But the guys inside the operation, they called him Fat Jack. Fat Jack had an idea. Get Wyatt to volunteer for the Muskie campaign. Walk in through the front door. No fake identity, no cover story. Just a friendly old cab driver who wants to help. He pitched it up the chain. Got sign-off from Kenneth Rietz, a senior official at Creep. Then he went to Wyatt. I've got a job for you. Walk into Muskie's campaign office. Say you like the senator. Say you want to volunteer. And once you're in, take everything. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He said yes on the spot. The Nixon campaign would pay him $1,000 a month. In 1971 money, that was serious cash. And for a man recovering from a stroke with no other income, it was the easiest decision he ever made. But what Wyatt didn't know, what he'd later claim he didn't realize for the first 2 months, was that he had just walked into the single largest political sabotage operation in American history, and he was about to become its most valuable weapon, the operation. One day, Elmer Wyatt, a 60-something cabbie with an easy smile and soft hands, walked into Edmund Muskie's campaign headquarters in Washington, D.C. He told them he admired the senator. He told them he wanted to help. They shook his hand and gave him a badge. No background check, no vetting, nothing. And then they gave him a job that would make any intelligence officer's jaw drop. They asked him to ferry documents between Muskie's Senate office and the campaign headquarters. Think about what that means. The most sensitive paperwork in the Democratic frontrunner. This entire operation, speeches, memos, strategy documents, internal communications, was now being hand-carried by a man on Nixon's payroll, every single day. But Wyatt didn't just read the documents. He rented an apartment, got a Xerox machine, and every time he carried a stack of papers from one office to the other, he'd stop at his apartment, copy everything, and send the originals on their way. Nobody noticed. Nobody checked. Nobody cared. He was just the volunteer. Just the driver. Just the old guy who showed up on time and didn't ask questions. Speeches that hadn't been released yet, copied. Internal campaign strategy, copied. Position papers, copied. A confidential letter about the nomination of William Rehnquist to the Supreme Court, copied. All of it went straight to Nixon's team. The president's re-election campaign was reading the opposition's playbook in real time. And the source of the leak? A man who, 6 months earlier, was pulling over for passengers on Pennsylvania Avenue. No one tells you this part of Watergate. The perfect spy. Now, here's what makes this story different from every other spy story you've heard. Most spies get caught because they get greedy. They take too much. Stay too long. Start living above their means. Wyatt didn't do any of that. He kept driving his cab. He kept playing poker. He kept showing up at the racetrack. Nothing changed on the outside. On the inside, though, he was feeding the most powerful office in the world, a constant stream of stolen intelligence, and his handler, Fat Jack Buckley. He would later tell the United States Senate that Elmer Wyatt was the best spy in the entire Watergate operation. Not the CIA guys, not the FBI-trained operatives, not the former military intelligence officers, the cab driver. And this is where most people would expect the story to end well for Wyatt. It doesn't, because on the other side of town, someone was about to do something incredibly stupid. The night everything fell apart. June 17, 1972. 5 men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington. They were trying to plant bugs, wiretaps, listening devices, and they got caught. Not because the FBI tracked them, not because a rival spy turned them in. A security guard noticed a piece of tape on a door lock. Tape. What brought down a presidency. A 25-cent piece of duct tape on a basement door. The 5 men arrested that night were connected to the CIA, the FBI, and the committee to re-elect the president. And once that thread was pulled, the entire machine started to unravel. But here's the thing most people don't understand. The Watergate break-in wasn't a one-off operation. It was one piece of a massive, coordinated campaign of political sabotage. Forged letters, midnight phone calls to voters pretending to be Muskie supporters, hotel rooms raided, shoes stolen from hallways and thrown in dumpsters, and buried deep within all of it was a taxi driver with a Xerox machine who nobody remembered. The unraveling. The investigation exploded. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein at the Washington Post started pulling on every thread they could find. A secret source, a man they called Deep Throat, was feeding them information from inside the FBI. Senate hearings began. Subpoenas flew. Witnesses cracked. One by one, Nixon's men were dragged in front of Congress and forced to answer for what they'd done. And in October 1973, it was Fat Jack's turn. John Buckley sat before the Senate Watergate Committee and testified about his role in the sabotage campaign. He admitted to political espionage, but when they asked him what Wyatt had collected, he was vague, deliberately imprecise. He said he couldn't remember many details. He mentioned draft speeches, position papers, press releases that hadn't gone public yet. He recalled a draft of a Muskie letter about a Supreme Court nomination, but he kept it foggy, controlled, just enough to cooperate, not enough to incriminate. And Wyatt? When investigators reached him, he said something that was either brilliant or completely naive. He claimed he didn't even realize what he was doing for the first 2 months of the operation. Think about that. A man who spent decades reading people in the back of his cab. A man who ran numbers. Who knew every gambler and every cop in D.C. And he's saying he didn't know he was spying? You decide. Everyone fell. Except him. Here's the part that separates the story from every other Watergate chapter. Dozens of Nixon's men went to prison. John Mitchell, the Attorney General, convicted. H.R. Haldeman, Chief of Staff, convicted. John Ehrlichman, Nixon's top advisor, convicted. G. Gordon Liddy, sentenced. E. Howard Hunt, sentenced. Donald Segretti, the dirty tricks mastermind, 4 months in prison. Even the president himself was forced to resign rather than face impeachment. The most powerful people in the country were destroyed by this scandal. But Elmer Wyatt? Never charged. Fat Jack Buckley? Never charged. They both walked away clean. Buckley argued before the Senate that what they did wasn't technically illegal. He called it opposition research, and prosecutors apparently agreed, or at least they didn't disagree enough to press charges. The cab driver and the ex-FBI agent were the only 2 people in the entire Watergate operation who got in, did the job, and got out without a scratch. No one tells you this part. The Disappearing Act. After the hearings, Wyatt did exactly what you'd expect from a man who knew how to disappear. He went back to driving his cab. No interviews, no book deals, no tell-all memoirs. He just vanished into the traffic of Washington, D.C. At home, he'd host poker games. Sometimes he'd wake up his daughter Verona in the middle of the night and make her play a hand for him. She was his lucky charm. He played the lottery every week, always the same number, his cab number, 108. He never told his family what he'd done. Never mentioned Watergate. Never said the name Buckley or the code name Fat Jack. He carried it with him, quietly, the way only a man who's been invisible his whole life can carry a secret. Cab 108. In 1981, Elmer Wyatt was behind the wheel of cab number 108. He pulled over to the side of the road, and he died, right there, in the driver's seat. The same seat where he'd spent his entire life. At his funeral, his family played Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em. They had no idea how perfect that song was. The box. The years passed. The family moved on. Watergate became a history textbook chapter. Then in 2005, Wyatt's son passed away, and eventually his daughter Verona ended up with a box of her father's old belongings. Things she'd never gone through. Things he'd kept hidden. Inside that box was a photograph. A man she didn't recognize. Heavy-set. Smiling. Signed at the bottom. Fat Jack. And beneath the name, an inscription that changed everything she thought she knew about her father. To Elmer Wyatt, friend. Generally taxi driver, different occasions spy, the handiest, authorized, and bona fide spy in the entire Watergate mess. Her father wasn't just a taxi driver. He was the ghost no one was looking for. The one operative who did exactly what he was told, took exactly what he was asked to take, and left without a trace. While CIA agents fumbled with duct tape and got caught by a security guard. While the Attorney General lied under oath and went to prison. While the President of the United States destroyed his own presidency, trying to cover up crimes committed by people dumber than a cab driver. Elmer Wyatt copied the documents, dropped them off, and went back to work. No one suspected him. No one arrested him. No one even remembered his name. 50 years of silence. Verona kept the photograph. She eventually shared the box with the Washington Post, and in 2022, 50 years after Watergate, the story was finally published. For half a century, the most effective spy in the most famous political scandal in history was completely forgotten. Not classified. Not redacted. Just overlooked. Because who remembers the driver? The name you were never told. Everyone knows the names. Nixon, Woodward, Bernstein, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Deep Throat. But nobody knows the name Elmer Wyatt. The man who walked through the front door of a presidential campaign, stole everything that mattered, and walked out the back door without anyone noticing. He wasn't trained. He wasn't recruited through any agency. He wasn't even political. He was just a man who knew that in Washington, D.C., nobody watches the driver. And that made him the most dangerous person in the room. He didn't lose anything. He didn't gain anything. He just disappeared. The way a good spy should. Cab 108. Engine off. Story over. If you're still here, you just heard a story that's never been told on this platform before. Subscribe to The Silent Agent, because the stories history forgot are always the most dangerous ones.